personal reflection and I guess some people say meditation or prayer, I think really help, because no matter what you have, you still only, I don't know, I still believe you still only have yourself to kind of count on. I know I don't mean disrespect to family or friends, but the reality is in my mind, you still have to count on yourself. And so I know it sounds cliche. I have conversations with God all the time. I thank God all the time. I ask for guidance. I ask for help. And I think those conversations really, when you're isolated and you're alone, and maybe you're at a low point, failures or difficult times, those things can really help to clear things in your mind. So I can think of, again, difficult times. Maybe I failed on an application. I failed on an opportunity I had, or an invention that I was so excited about. And sure, your friends and your family talk to you and everything else, but at the end of the day, for me at least, I need to have that own personal reflection, that own guidance, and having those time on your own in prayer and isolation, having the conversations with God in your ways, and getting that is something that I think helps to get through things.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, welcome to our episode 4 of Moonshot Journeys. Today we have with us Dr. Ahmed, and he will be sharing with us his journey on how he came about to becoming a life-changing eye surgeon, and realizing along his journey that, hey, the devices that are out there are not good enough, and I'm going to go ahead and implement my own devices. So we'll learn all about this with this. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Ahmed, and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you so much, Zubair. It's a pleasure to be here. Congratulations on the work you're doing, both in terms of your day job and your other work you do. A lot of different things you're doing to help people. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind words. So with that, guys, as you know, our focus is basically showcasing with you the moonshot journeys of different people, how they have taken, what decisions they made, how they persevered through hardships and challenges, and how they overcome, so that while maintaining their faith-based values, so that inshallah that can inspire us to, as we head into 2024, to get off and work harder towards bigger goals. So with that, Dr. Ahmed, depending on where you would like to start, we typically like to take you back in time and see what did you used to think when you were in high school or university. Is that something that you knew all along, or what was the early days for Dr. Ahmed like?
It's always hard to kind of figure out where things start, but I think, as you said, logically, maybe go back to the beginning for me. And I want to say again, and I told you earlier that I really mean it. I think so many people have an amazing experience to share, and I don't mean to share my experience to be any better than anyone else's, or I'm smarter or intelligent than anyone else, but maybe if it gives some thoughts and some inspirations, maybe it'll help. It certainly inspires me to share my story as well, which is nothing special, by the way, but it is a story that we all have. So for me, I grew up born and raised in Saskatchewan, and as a Muslim, as a visible minority, as a brown guy, my name, actually, you called me Ike, which I appreciate, but my name was actually Iqbal, which I have to say, and I'll tell you why it became Ike in some ways. Born into a small Muslim family that grew in the middle of nowhere. There were no Muslim families. There were very little in terms of minorities. So I learned very quickly that being different has its negatives and has its positives. And being different means you're often isolated, difficulty, and in those days there was some racism. People treated you differently. But I think I was very fortunate that I was raised in a family that really stuck together with the values of being a Muslim family. That really helped keep the compass straight. And in fact, being different for me was a blessing, because it kept me away from some of the bad things that everybody else was doing. Let's face it, with kids, you grow up and everyone is doing different things, sometimes not so good things. But because I was different and because of my value system growing up, I think that kind of kept me protected. And I appreciate that. I appreciate, God, Allah keeping me protected in that way. So in many ways, it became an asset. It also, although in many ways I felt bad that people couldn't pronounce my name, they looked at me differently, and it even made me think of changing my name, which eventually, this is what people started calling me different names, and I adopted it. At the time, I thought this was, a good idea to be accepted. But later on, as I grew up, I realized that actually being different, eventually, when you're a kid, you don't realize it, was actually something that was an asset. It actually taught me to think differently, to innovate, to find another way to survive or to be successful as a child or as a teenager, away from everybody else, tackle a different path. And eventually that, I hope, inshallah, has helped me to carve a new path in my field of medicine, thinking differently than everybody else and taking that value system I grew up with in that way. And I remember very distinctly that, and we used to have Islamic school in the family room because it was only my family, maybe another family. And our parents would teach us, and we would learn the Prophet, peace be upon him, stories, particularly the time during the Meccan period, when it was a very difficult period of early Muslims and the companions of the Prophet, the challenges they had, very different, the ignorance around them, and how humble and how they suffered, but yet still found their way and being patient, and eventually leading to success. So those stories inspired me, because what else do you have? You have just your family, your values, and that's it when you're a small child growing up in a small place. So that's kind of where it started for me. And remember, I'm in Toronto now. We are surrounded by a big Muslim community. It's very hard to grow up being only one or two families. I mean, at that time, you could not find proper food to eat. You had no one to compare or to contrast or to be role models. So that family value system, which was so important as a Muslim family and a Pakistani family, my background was very important for me. Alhamdulillah.
All right. So looking at that, and then was medical thing something that you figured out early on in your journey in education, or was that something that happened?
I think I have to say again, being from a brown immigrant family,
Okay,
no
that's
disrespect, but it's like, hey, son, beta, you have to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that professionally, which was great. And so my father is a physician, and that was kind of a line I knew very early, and I knew I wanted to be a surgeon for many reasons, because I wanted to use my hands to do good work. And also I felt that the blessings of doing that was something that was important. So for me, that was kind of my kind of background. I have to admit shamelessly that it was kind of just a Desi thing to do at the time, right? Maybe it still is, I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, definitely you didn't stop at that, right? I mean, that you didn't become complacent. So I guess maybe we kind of push forward. Then so let's say you are fresh out of the school and you are starting up surgeon, what have you, right? And then what took you to that next levels of working on the hard problem, working on those challenging? How did you come about to pick on glaucoma, or what was your journey like to then inventing devices and so on and so forth? And then if you can also go back and help us highlight in terms of some of the failures, right? I mean, failures is obviously one way of looking at it. When you experimented,
Sure, yeah.
you looked at something, it didn't work out, and then instead of giving up, hey, you know what, I'm still a surgeon, doing quite well, and just like become complacent and enjoy life and what have you, as opposed to becoming a well-renowned teacher, researcher, surgeon, as well as an inventor of devices.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, first of all, I look at any success I had, and I really truly mean this, because I truly don't believe that I actually deserve some of this success, or some of the awards or whatever maybe have been given. And I know it sounds cliche-ish, but I know that because I know the effort to do those things. It doesn't just happen. These things actually restore my faith, believe it or not. And even when I'm operating, I often say the story, and I'm doing very complicated surgeries, and I just go back to your question. I mean, I grew up, again, always being restless, right? Being different. And I like my situation. I want to change things. I always had this desire in me, And so growing up, I went to medical school. I felt very different, the way I thought, the way I looked, and the way my name, everything else. And, I started to embrace this difference. That was a change. And actually I thought, even my name, for example, like when I was a kid, you're kind of immature, whatever. As I matured as a young adult, I said, you know what, this difference actually maybe has some power in it, And so I started to look at challenges and things differently. So when I was taught medicine, I respect my teachers, but I always had the inner thing to say, well, is that really the truth? Is that reality? Is that an assumption that is assumption, or the real truth? And this goes back to our faith as well. We're taught, we don't just make assumptions. We have to base our work on knowledge and on thinking, and we are guided this way, So I've always strived to get the best evidence and the best knowledge, and that's very compatible with our faith as well, And so that really drove me to be a bit of a critic in my own way to the way conventional thinking was. And in my area of specialty, which I went into eye surgery, which I love, preserving vision, the beauty of the work we do is very technical. I felt an area of need was in glaucoma, which is when pressure builds up in the eye can cause, severe permanent blindness. And I felt that we were not looking at this disease in perhaps the best way, with all due respect, and we have to make sure we don't have too much ego in this. And so I looked at it more in a surgical way. At the time, glaucoma was not looked at as very surgical, it was very medical, very observational. People got worse, and eventually you did major surgery. So looking at this differently, it allowed me to hopefully, embark on a career in terms of finding new ways. And, collaboration and mentorship was all important in my journey, but going back to that being different, I think that those traits, I think, were embedded in me early on, and I hope it's helped me in my career to maybe find a better way to do things. And that's where it came upon. In that journey, there were hundreds and thousands of failures. And I think, again, I mean, we are weak. I have to say, during those weak times and failures, that's probably the most time when I look to my religion, my way of life, even more. We shouldn't only look at the faith then, of course,
Yeah.
but the reality is that we do. And as we know, we're always given challenge. God gives us challenges, and He gives us challenges that we have to handle, and we should. So I kind of always step back. I pray every day, and there in those prayers, I always try to derive strength from that and make dua that I'm guided the right way. And that's what got me through many of these failures, and to try to learn from those failures and not just say, okay, well, they happened and it was because of some other reason. I always, found an internal reason why maybe that happened. So those were definitely part of that journey. But I have to say, I've had a privileged life, honestly, brother. I've had things have been given to me, I think, in ways that I think that other people, didn't have a privilege of. And I truly just look at this as a blessing from God, honestly. And that gives me that gratefulness, to be very grateful to be where I am today in my position here. And I hope that drives me to do something I love to do as well, which is to teach and to share. For me, this is so important. And the learnings, again, of our Prophet and our faith of teaching and sharing and knowledge is important. The concept of community, of being an ummah, the brotherhood, sisterhood, that feeling is an amazing feeling, right? You can pray by yourself or pray in a group. We're always encouraged to be together. Why is that? Not just because you just show up somewhere. There's a certain value in coming together and collaborating. You can't just get by just doing things on your own and then putting ideas together. You can build amazing things. So this taught me to build teams together, to build that strong relationships with your people you work with and respect and be grateful for that, and genuinely believe that and treat people well and treat people with equally and encourage diversity. These are all things that I think I knew came from somewhere, and they came from that value system I was taught in an early level. So those are things that I think really helped a lot. But I do, again, have to say this is something that I know is a gift, and that's why I'm always grateful for that opportunity I have here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, I think if I were to reflect back, so you mentioned about being restless, going back to first principles, not just accepting the status quo and being different and challenging the status quo and thinking, well, how can we push the envelope forward? And then also looking at it, as you mentioned, like you just didn't, tap into things that were already being done and let me just like deliver that existing techniques or existing methodologies, but rather, well, this area is not being looked at. What can we do here and how can we push forward? And at the same time acknowledging that, yes, you tried something, didn't work out, experimenting, what have you, and then you pushed forward with that. And beautifully, you mentioned about, acknowledging the privileges and the resources that we are born with, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives different sort of resources and privileges. Everyone has some privileges. Everyone has something to start with. But that's the thing, like, do you just become complacent on that, or do you make it part of your ego, which you mentioned several times as well, or you utilize that to now push forward and, leave the world a better place? So during that journey, is there any special moment that comes to your mind, a story that you would like to share in terms of whether it be a technical thing, a medical thing, on how you struggled or went about and, had that aha moment on any one of your discoveries?
I don't know if there's one particular time, but I will say that personal reflection and I guess some people say meditation or prayer, I think really help, because no matter what you have, you still only I don't know, I still believe you still only have yourself to kind of count on. I don't mean disrespect to family or friends, but the reality is in my mind, you still have to count on yourself, and so I know it sounds cliche. I have conversations with God all the time. I thank God all the time. I ask for guidance. I ask for help. And I think those conversations really, when you're isolated and you're alone, and maybe you're at a low point, failures or difficult times, those things can really help to clear things in your mind, So I can think of, again, difficult times. Maybe I failed on an application. I failed on an opportunity I had, or an invention that I was so excited about. And sure, your friends and your family talk to you and everything else. But at the end of the day, for me at least, I need to have that own personal reflection, that own guidance, and having those time on your own in prayer and isolation, having the conversations with God in your ways, and getting that, is something that I think helps to get through things. So those were some of the important things. Again, I think that it's really accumulation of all those things that kind of bring you to where you are. And I think that, being restless and always wanting more is that hunger that keeps you going, right? And I think the things I realized is that, there is obviously a lot of great ideas out there, a lot of great knowledge out there. We have to really, have a foundation of knowledge, a foundation of thinking. But in the end of the day, I think that energy and passion goes a long way. And I think those are the things that I think really drive a lot of innovation to, to succeed. You need to have that energy and passion to deliver the knowledge you have.
Awesome. So you mentioned about working with other people, but at the same time, you have to have that individual perseverance and grit and strength and what have you, and then tapping into faith and believing in it. That's the total essence of tawakkul, right? That I'm going to put in effort, and Allah will make it work, and then produce some result out of that. So how was your journey and experiences with working with other people, especially? Did you have any co-founders, or how did you collaborate when you were looking into, device inventions and what have you? I would imagine that's not something you dive deep depth with depth into. It was more of like, hey, how could I have these tools as a surgeon, and then how did you collaborate around that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, these things never happen in a vacuum, and I think having a good mentor is really important. I was fortunate enough to embark on an amazing fellowship in Salt Lake City, Utah, and working with my mentor, the late Alan Crandall, for me was really the key to open up an opportunity. And I think that mentorship and the guidance and opening some doors for you is so critical and important, and has taught me the value of hopefully being a mentor for others around me as well. That was very important. And then taking a chance, I mean, sometimes we go for where all the glamour and the glitz is to try to get success. Some of my most heartfelt innovations in designing new devices and instruments were working with industry partners or companies that were very small at the time, that were maybe considered to be on the fringe, or not as popular. And so I have always gravitated to those that are not as popular, those that are not like in the cool gang, because I was never in the cool gang. So not always looking for where the spotlight is, but looking maybe where the shadows are, and seeing maybe there's an opportunity there that people have not unearthed and looked. And the people in those shadows have really gave me that basis to start. Because once you start, and once you achieve something and people see that, the reality is that people then gravitate toward those achievements, and things become a lot easier. And so they always say that your first one or two projects that are successful, that lift off, make all the rest of the projects so much easier. And so those first initial steps were for me very important. So I encourage that I know we often look to see, I'm going to go and work with this dude who's really successful, and that's understandable. But maybe we should go look and see where somebody maybe isn't so, in the spotlight. Maybe they have something that people are not seeing, and that may be your opportunity. That for me was where what drove me, and that gave me that success to then excel and amplify what I was doing. So that's kind of what I think led to some of the early work in design. And I will say that it's a very isolating and divisive atmosphere to be sometime. Like in my field, I was very naive, I would say. I had all these ideas. I didn't realize, and surprisingly, we all do. There's a lot of egos around. People who are traditional, people who are in power, let's say, they want to stay in that position. So when a young kid comes up and has all these ideas, and maybe innocently or naively is excited about these things, people get a little bit worried, and maybe I don't know if I want to say jealous, or maybe are in fact insecure, and go to a lot of length to put you down, to put you aside, to discredit you, to defame you, things like that. And I did see that ugly side. I still see it. You get a target on your back, and that can be really difficult. You feel alone. You feel alone in your journey at times. Again, it goes back to that personal reflection, to that connection with your faith that gets you through those things. But also, and for me, very fortunately, having a really good set of friends and family that get you through that.
Awesome.
And that is so important.
Awesome. Yeah, just wanted. This is really important. I think it should be a aha moment for many folks because this is it. Like you're applying to the top universities, applying to work for top companies, or trying to get investment or partnership from the top folks. And then if that doesn't happen, you say, "Well, my I didn't get validated," and then you just like pack up and then move on. But I think what you mentioned there is like that's not the only options that are out there. Like looking at other opportunities, other avenues that other people are not thinking about, and then finding that step up or that collaboration to keep going as opposed to, well, the top ones didn't work, so my idea should be bad, and let me just back up. That's beautiful. It's awesome. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to have a bit of a chip on your shoulder, to be like, hey man, I'm going to prove people are wrong, but don't do it with a big ego, right? Do it. I'm going to just put my head down, work really hard, and push harder than anyone else can. And I think I have to say, behind the scenes, we put lots of hours in, and I live, eat, and breathe this. I mean, you can ask my family and my friends. I mean, I'm 24 hours a day thinking, doing this work. It's not all glamorous, and the hard work is required. There's no way to get around it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think as you were doing that, right, obviously it required a lot of hard work, a lot of hours to be put in, and definitely exciting as well. Like knowing your own personality and your own aptitude and attitude towards it. So sometimes some of the other things that are important in life, but maybe not as exciting at that moment, whether it be taking care of your health, practicing your faith, the Ramadan, the Salah, what have you, giving time to the family and family expectations, and from what we see on your Instagram and what have you, you do try to maintain all those areas as well. So how would you say that you went about it? Did it require discipline, or you had disciplined habits, or what would you say around that?
Yeah, I mean, they talk about balance. I think balance is always hard to achieve. I think you have to be aware, first of all, of that, the importance, and sometimes you have to be reminded by that by family and friends. I think that's really important to have good people around you to kind of remind you of that. I think having the right people at your work and your family and your friendship, I think, is important. Who you surround yourself with can help you to keep that. I think that's really key, in terms of achieving that. I think that there's always a give and take. I think that's always a challenge in managing these things. And I've been, again, I feel I've just been blessed to have that opportunity. But as you said before, discipline, I think, is really key, right? Organization is really key, and patience. And again, I'm going to go back because I mean, part of this conversation is about faith. Why are we asked to pray 5 times a day? That takes discipline, right? Why, part of Ramadan, I always take great, pride, not in hopefully a negative way, but, of keeping all my fasts, doing everything in Ramadan, continuing to work, all these things, because it gives us that kind of strength. So those kind of things, I think, teach us, in our lives to be disciplined, to be organized, and to manage your time well, not to waste time, not to be too lazy, not to procrastinate. I still do, but I think those are the things that help us to drive forward, and having a mission, of what you want to achieve, I think is hopefully allow us to do that. But I think those are the things that help. But by no means, I'm sure my family and friends will tell you, by no means am I achieving the best balance. I'm always short one way or the other, and you want to kind of try to invest in everything to make sure that you can keep everything, happy as much as you can.
Awesome. So basically, for summarize, like being aware of it, surrounding yourself with the right people, and then having that discipline. And then, yeah, I mean, like you will always have these fluctuations from one end to the other, but like coming back to that, the center point to the best of your ability. Awesome. So I think, alhamdulillah, like, as you said, and rightly so, right? At the end of the day, Allah uses people and Allah grants people with different things, right? And then there are some people who take advantages of the opportunity and resources that they have, and some who don't. And then some, when they take advantages, it just becomes, well, I did it, self-made person, it's just me. And obviously from what we can see, it's really appreciated, and may Allah accept from you and bless you, put blessings in your work, that you do attribute that success and that ability to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, rightly so. So what keeps you going? Like, alhamdulillah, you have achieved a lot from, I would say that you are probably in the top 1% or top 0.5% of people in your field. What keeps you going? Is that like, do you kind of move your challenge? Do you move your targets ahead? Or, having competing spirits around your colleagues that while there are still competition going, and I'm sure like there may have been a lot of your colleagues that have kind of stopped, become complacent after a certain number of publications, teachings, awards, what have you. So what's that journey like?
I think the first thing probably I would say is that I would never think that I'm in the top percent, whatever. And I think that drives me to say, you know what, you keep on going, right? I think that, but I think that if one thinks that you're at the top of your game, then that may be a problem in and of itself. So I think that I'm always, I've always prided myself on being the outsider, being the underdog, being someone, outside of the, of the general mentality. So I think that maybe helps to drive me, to say I'm always want to do more and push the envelope. I think that being restless, I think, is part of my personality. So I'm never satisfied sitting still, and always trying to do something different. I mean, I guess maybe in some ways it's a bit of a attention deficit in that capacity. Hopefully not in a terrible way, but you're always kind of thinking ahead about what's going on next. And not that I get bored of things, but I do say, okay, I've achieved something, but I need to continue to move on to achieve something else and do something else. It's also important that you do this also to transition. So, for example, for me, I've held many leadership positions. I've taken leadership and things. I love to see the next generation come up and take over, and lead. So that of itself in that journey is satisfying. So rather than staying in a position and be complacent, the ability to mentor somebody, teach them, have them grow it, and then actually take on that leadership and maybe do better than you did even in a project is very satisfying. As just for a student, for me to see a student of mine or a trainee of mine to see that, or a colleague. So that transition is always important. So that's helped me to kind of keep me moving to the next step. And I think always having this, again, I guess this rebel mentality a bit, of I'm going to, continue to respectfully, I don't want to use the word attack, but respectfully, try to take apart some of the assumptions that maybe the traditional way of thinking has kind of helped me to push me to keep on pursuing that. Never be satisfied, always being a little bit, personal. People often say business is business. For me, honestly, everything's personal. I take everything personally. Maybe that's good or bad. Everything's personal because it starts with myself. So that helps me to drive me that way. But hopefully do things for the right reason. I think that's really important. I think we often in this day and world we do things maybe for not the right reason, and I think that that's okay. We all have our own other things that our own weaknesses in that way. But I hope genuinely, and I know I'm not far from being a great person. I hope do things for the right reason in the beginning and in the end. I hope that's so important that we do it for that reason,
Yeah,
and
I think
that's hopefully
definitely.
will guide us.
Absolutely. So this is that. I mean, you mentioned about the right reason, and obviously there's a lot of in the popular culture the concept of the why. But and even if bringing it back to the faith, that's one of the key things. I mean, all of our educational books and the books of the hadith, they start with the concept of niyyah, the intention, like why are you doing it, right? And I think that's super important, and that's what will give you the long-lasting effects from a relationship with the creator and Allah perspective, but at the same time it helps you persevere as well, because if you have the right reason, it is for benefiting the community, or as you said in another angle, helping and teaching and empowering another student and the next generation of doctors and surgeons and what have you. That also kind of ties into how you work and how you move forward with discipline and how you don't become complacent and what have you. So that's awesome, definitely. So in those journeys, as new folks are coming out, do you have any recommendation of any books, podcasts, from a great moonshot and things like that perspective?
So it's really interesting. I wish I did. I have to say I am not one, to be honest with you, reading books about how to be successful or do this or do that. I'll be honest with you, and maybe part of it is just my own thinking of I'm going to do my own way in my own. Maybe that's my ego talking in that way. I have to say, I mean, I think I do sometimes come upon some good podcasts, and I just saw one of your podcasts. I enjoyed listening to it. So sometimes that comes randomly. Part of me is I just maybe just feel I don't have maybe enough time, and I'm
Yeah.
just busy. I think that's probably one thing I'm going to add is that being busy is good and bad. Being busy is great because it keeps your mind always thinking, but maybe it also takes you away from maybe other things that maybe would have been helpful that you ignore. So that's my long answer to say, that I probably don't have a lot of advice to go and read this or do that. I think that the living experience for me is probably my best teaching moments, and that means being with people, visiting people, talking to people, these interactions we have here, and find people who can give you that. It may just be a 5-minute discussion, chat, it may be a 1 minute in the elevator, or it may be a long, multi-year relationship that somebody with, and a connection. But I think those are kind of the way I learn those things. Obviously, listen, I mean, we always go back to the Quran and Hadith. as far as a source. And I'm lucky enough to people around me to remind me of those things. I have to always tell myself I need to do more and read more. But those are obviously, that goes without saying that those are the knowledge sources. But in many other ways for me, it is very much that kind of personal journey, and I think that if I can give another example, that you just never know where interaction may change your life. And honestly, for me, it could be on an airplane sitting next to a random stranger, and you decide to listen to your AirPods or listen to your movie, but maybe just saying, hello to the person next to you, it may change your life. It may change their life. I know it sounds cliche. It may do that. I've experienced that in an elevator, at the beach, randomly, on an airplane, in an airport, in a hospital. Random strangers. So we often live in our own box and our own, walls, and we're thinking of our own thing, and you just never know. So I love the ability to meet strangers and talk to people. I think it helps us and it helps them, and that's probably the places where I get inspiration from. It's not a big name, some huge superstar. I'm talking about random people on the street. You never know who it is. You may help them in a difficult moment. You never know, or they may help you in your difficult moment. You don't realize what they helped you. So that's where, take that, and you never know where what that happens. I would just say that's the kind of thing. Probably the answer's out there, the guidance is out there. You just have to be able to be open your eyes and our ears to receive it.
Great. And I think you're rightly so. Like, there is obviously one extreme where you're like all about consuming content and just like not implementing it, right? So I mean, it can help, especially for people to get started. But I think from your learning experience, more about thinking and doing and then interacting, collaborating, and the mentorship aspect that you talked about. And this is rightly so, because there are many folks that just like, well, all day consuming content and doing nothing. So you need to have that right balance. Beautifully so. Okay, awesome. And then, so you mentioned about, Quran and Hadith. So is there some words that you recently read or heard that kind of resonated with you that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, boy, in today's world, we're challenged with conflict, and we're challenged with some serious divisiveness, And I think, one of the most popular verses from Al-Hujur, about being human beings, about God creating us, and humankind from males and females, and putting us into nations and tribes so we know each other, And when you think about that, and the purpose of us being here on earth, and although we are of different nations and different tribes and different religions even, we're meant to know each other. We're meant to have that ability to connect, and the importance of equality and fairness is important. I think in this day and age more than ever, I think that verse is important to remember. I think that it's so easy for us to be in our own isolated world with our own people in our own echo chamber, in our own community, and it's a safe place for many of us, and it's understandable. But maybe these are the times where we need to think about the ability to connect with other people that are different than us, and find a way to find a common ground to a path toward whatever it may be, solutions or peace or resolutions, And so I'm reminded of that, as difficult as it is, And so I think that's kind of maybe what comes to mind today, at least for me, in today's world. And being a Muslim in today's world is difficult, because all of the different things that are swirling around, the anti-Muslim hate that's out there, the oppression and the challenges that many Muslims live in countries around the world. And I'm not just talking about, of course, some countries. Look at many countries around the world, even in Muslim countries, Muslims are having hardships, and living in difficult conditions. And so it is a difficult time for us. And I think these are times where we need to really rise up as best possible. And living here in a country like Canada and the U.S. Is a great blessing. I mean, there are challenges here. We can argue about the moral fabric of our countries, but certainly as Muslims, we can practice at freedom and free will. We can connect with people and be treated with respect. For the most part, there still is unfortunately racism and things, but in a way we can do that. And how do we use that in the best way as Canadians, as Americans, being Muslims, to be a great citizen and a great contributor to the world? That's, I think, what we need to think about, and get outside of our own box, right? Because being a Muslim is being a human being. Being a Muslim is being a world citizen and caring about everybody in the world, not just about Muslims, but everybody, right? Obviously, we have our own connections, but that's what I would say. Now, those are difficult things to say during these times because let's face it, we're seeing some very serious, unheard of destruction in our populations. And so, but in these times, we need to think about these things, and think about compassion and humanity as best as possible, And so, going back to that verse, I think that's kind of what that reminds me of.
That's really awesome and very relevant, as you mentioned. And I guess, yeah, if you definitely want to elaborate more on this, because as a doctor, right, and because you're really at the forefront of saving humanity, making the lives of humans better, right, improving them with whatever physical challenges that they may be facing. And then at the same time, and then even as for the most part as a community, most of us are trying to push the envelope forward for the betterment, better lifestyle, better existence of the world. And then for whatever reason, we do have an element within us throughout our communities and humanity that do try to focus on the destructive elements of it, right? More power, more land, more of my race or whatever it is, right? So how do you feel about it as a doctor, and what would, if you wanted to expand, you mentioned a lot on that already, JazakAllahu khair for that. If you wanted to expand on, how different people, whether Muslims, non-Muslims, folks who are neutral, should they look at that conflict that's going on, and what role they can play into achieving world peace?
Yeah, that's a huge question, and I hope we can find some ways. I think first of all, being in medicine gives us a unique insight because we take a Hippocratic oath to do no harm, and I mean we all should have that oath, of course, as human beings. But as medical practitioners, this is even more sacred, and it is our call and our calling. And I will say that I think medicine has brought people together as well. I mean, I traveled to all over the world. As an example, I've traveled to Israel, I've traveled to Palestine. I've traveled for medical reasons, as an example, and this has allowed us to bridge, big differences in medicine. And I think that may be an opportunity to, come together in that way. At the same time, unfortunately, it doesn't mean that all physicians are saints, as we've seen as well, unfortunately. So I think that is that basic element of our purpose is really critical as physicians, and to think about that way. I think we all have something to contribute, and I think what is important is that there are more than one way to contribute. And I think that it's also divisive to say this is only one way to vocalize or to act on something. As you know from the youth, of course, the best way is to act on something and do something with your own hands, with your own actions. And if you can't do that, then we do it with our voices. If we can't do that, we do it, keep it in our heart. And everybody has their and of course that is the weakest of all. But we all have our own capacity and our own in situation to manage that way. And I think that we should try to find ways to collaborate. We have to remember that be smart. I always say be smart and strategic. And that really means be thoughtful. There's a time and a place for certain things. And again, go back to our Prophet, peace be upon him, right? At the beginning of the period in Mecca, was that the time to revolt and to throw stones and to start attacking and fighting and shouting? Well, God rightly guided our Prophet to be quiet, right? And to be silent and to suffer in silence in some ways, unfortunately. There's a time and a place for something, but that's the smart and the wisdom that I think we need to try to achieve, and that's what I try to promote. I always say that, listen, I mean, peace comes both ways, right? I mean, we can shout for justice, we can shout for this, we can shout slogans and everything else, but if we think what is the next step after that, it still means we have to have peace with somebody, right? We have to have a bridge toward that. Well, how do we achieve that? There's a way to do that, and things are never black and white. And how can we find the right like-minded people in other communities that may be appearing to be foes or adversaries that can come together on that? And I truly believe that can happen, and it's going to happen differently than it did 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago or even 50 years ago. We're in different times. And so, understand power differentials, understand the role. When people in power have great responsibility, absolutely. But people who are not in power cannot just go and basically then assume that they have the power to do that. So, you can shout and slogan and do all the rest of it, which I think absolutely has a value for that. But there's also smart strategic ways to reach out to other communities, to find common elements to talk about. Does it mean that people who do that are weak, or that they don't believe in supporting a cause? I don't think so. I think that they're hopefully being strategic about saying we want to try to find a way to achieve some bridge, some connection with people. in the end of the day, I've learned in life, it's about connection, right? You know, if you can connect with an idea or with a person or an organization, whatever it is, you know, that is a big, that overcomes a huge barrier to the next step. So we have to find, as difficult as it is, as far apart as we find each other, you know, in this world today on some of these issues, finding at least, there must be something we can connect on. And yes, we could argue about the history, argue about who said what, who said this, who did that, whatever else. But is it going to achieve something to the next step? We have to compromise. I have to say that, unfortunately. We have to live in reality. We have to say, what can we do right now for a lasting solution to these things? So that's what I would say in generalities. You know, I've said a few things, and I think some people have been upset with me because they feel, you know, why are you not stronger on saying these things, or why are you not stronger from both sides? I guess that's maybe a good thing in some ways. But my true intention, and God knows this, is not because I'm afraid. It's not because I want to make sure I don't offend somebody in my community or another community, you know, or a weakness of that way. Absolutely, for me and my intention is because I'm hopefully, inshallah, trying to find a way to connect. Because then after all this is happening here, one still has to make peace with somebody, right? You have to find that other partner on that side. How are we going to do that? Well, maybe now's not the time, but there will be a time for that. And we need to find the like-minded individuals in that way. And I truly believe that's the way how we do that. And other thing I also trust is God has a plan. God has a plan. So for me, as difficult as these things are going on, you have to basically trust in that, you know, in whatever's happening in the world today. And that's my feeling on those things. So doesn't mean we don't stop what we want to do, but we have to have that faith as well. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. And of course, much more to discuss on those things.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think this is really beautiful, and I know you wouldn't agree on that, but I think this has been very inspiring, and you know, and just like really appreciative of your time, right? I mean, there are many people who think about, well, how many subscribers you have, what are the view counts you're getting on your podcast and what have you, but really appreciate that you made time for us and shared your experience and your thoughts. And there are a lot of lessons that we can learn, and then, you know, one of the key ones, as you mentioned, is being practical, right? Not just thinking, well, I'm starting at a position of disadvantage and I'm just going to stay at that, but rather pushing the envelope, you know, being restless, being uncomfortable, and, you know, making a difference regardless of where you start with, regardless of what people think about you. And, you know, how we wrapped up with, you know, finding that humanity, finding that connection, and being strategic, and, you know, listening to the other side and finding ways and solutions to move ahead.
Well, JazakAllahu, thank you so much. You've been a gracious host, and I have to say, listening to your summary was better than the way I could describe it. So, thank you for doing that and everything you're doing. And again, I'm inspired by just hearing you and talking to you and learning together. So, thank you so much. I hope to see you soon in person, inshallah, as well.
Inshallah. All right. Thank you so much once again. Thanks again, and may Allah bless you, continue to bless you, and take a lot of great work from you and your team, and so on and so forth. So with that, we'll wrap up.
May Allah bless you as well, and help all those that are suffering, and you know, bring the humanity in all of us, inshallah. Thank you so much.